Was that a little bit over the top? Maybe, but that's not the point. The point here is coffee. Good morning, everyone, or whatever time it might be where you are right now. It looks like the flashback is actually gonna speed up a little bit from here. In this chapter alone, we covered over 6 years in Oden's life. And while it almost felt a little bit like a history lesson by Oda, I think we got a lot of insightful information and especially characterization in this chapter for a lot of characters that we're familiar with. So I guess without any further ado, grab yourself something hot or cold to drink, maybe throw a cookie in there, and let's jump right into this new chapter. Roll the intro. Even though the focus of this chapter still lay heavily on Wano, we could already see Oda starting to tie in some previous plotlines, which I think will make Wano the worthy climax of the New World saga. Chapter 962 of One Piece is out, and I have to ask, am I the only one who felt like we broke the fourth wall a little bit in this one? Oda giving Oden the role of narrator for his own journey by introducing his logbook is a really smooth way of bringing his character closer to the reader. In general, I feel this entire chapter was very heavily focused on giving more characterization to the scabbards, something I was really waiting for. After all, it will be critically important for the upcoming battle against Kaido and Orochi that we will be able to empathize and connect not only with their cause, but especially with their characters. So while the current timeline gives us the endpoint of their story and development, we now finally got the starting point for all 9 of them and how they became relevant to the world. Now it's gonna be Oda's job to slowly fill in the gaps in the middle for us. But this is a solid base that we can work from. In addition, this chapter also confirmed some thoughts the community had for quite some time regarding Wano. As always, make sure to share your thoughts on this chapter with me in the comments below. Also, if you enjoy this type of video, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. The first thing that seems to become clearer and clearer to me is that Oden is in general a very kind and altruistic person, whose carefreeness and confidence is exploited by others for their own benefits. In the opening of the chapter, we see him talking to Yasu about curry, which apparently wasn't even an official part of Wano until recently due to its lawlessness. After Oden departs for curry to bring peace to it, it appears that Oden has demolished his room and stolen money from Yasu's safe. However, as we find out, it was actually Orochi who apparently saw an opportunity in Oden's presence to enrich himself and blame it on the samurai. Interestingly enough though, Yasu, being sharp as he is, immediately suspects Orochi for being the real culprit, however for some reason decides to not confront him about it. I feel like this scene alone gives us a very interesting insight about both Oden's and Orochi's character very early on. Now, bear with me here. This may sound a little bit out there, but I hope it'll make sense. In a way, I feel like Oden could stand in for a combination of the Straw Hats, while Orochi could be seen as a combination of the villains the Straw Hats have faced so far. Oden, in many ways, reminds me of a combination of Zoro, Luffy, and Sanji. He brings Luffy's unconcerned and carefree nature, as well as his ability to naturally understand people's feelings and turn them into allies. He obviously has Zoro's fighting skills and warrior mentality, and just like Zoro seems to find real enjoyment in battle. And just like Sanji, he also has a caring, emotional, and smart calculating side to him. See where I'm going with this? Now clearly, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are far too complex and long-developed characters to be summarized in a single person. But some of their most prominent characteristics can be found and reflected in Oden. And I'm fairly certain Oda did this on purpose to paint a certain picture of Oden for us. So what about Orochi? Well, Orochi in a similar manner seems to combine many traits that we have seen before in other One Piece villains. His cunning betrayal of Yasu, as well as his scheming nature, are very similar to Blackbeard under Whitebeard's command. His militaristic and hardline ideals seem to refer to Akainu's way of doing things. His schemes and intrigues to gain power over a country are quite similar to Doflamingo, while his inability to rule the country reminds us of Wapol. This list goes on and on. You could also find similarities to Spandam and his cowardness, to Buggy and his envy and insecurity, and even to someone like Kaido, since he somehow has managed to acquire a devil fruit that allows him to play on the great stage of things. Now, you could call all of these things a coincidence, But I personally, and I know I sound like a broken record at this point, I personally think that Oda chose this setup for Orochi and Oden deliberately for at least two reasons. One, to show us how complex and powerful these two central figures in Wano are, and two, to immediately create a sense of familiarity with the Straw Hats and their journey so far. In a way, Oden and Orochi feel like a flashback of the Straw Hats in their fights against countless antagonists. At least that is my personal interpretation of things. However, please make sure to share your thoughts on this with me in the comments. Coming back to the chapter, we now get introduced to the rest of the retainers. The first encounter is immediately a bummer. As it turns out, and as many of us suspected before, Kiku and Izo are actually brothers. Now, not only is it great to see a character that we met so long ago tie back into the story, but it turns out that for quite some time, Izo was actually one of Oden's retainers. So now I'm more than curious to see how he actually ended up leaving the Scabbards and joining Whitebeard. Kanjuro, meanwhile, turned out to be a bandit that was taking people's hair to make brushes and sell them to survive. Raizo turned out to be a former member of the Oniwa Banshu, which I guess makes a lot of sense in retrospect, since he was acquainted with Fukurokuju and is also the only male ninja we know outside of the Shogun's guard squad. Also, him being heartbroken by a Konoichi makes me wonder if that might have been Shinobu. Then we get to Shuten Maru, and Oda seems to put a certain level of emphasis on his character here. In fact, it becomes more and more clear why Kaido was interested in recruiting him into his ranks. Not only did Shuten Maru seem capable of overcoming Jack, he apparently also posed a real challenge for Oden to handle in the end. Considering that this is roughly 40 years in the past, I really wonder how powerful the samurai is today. And man, I really can't wait to see him in action. In the time that followed, Oden slowly turned Curry into a peaceful place and finally got taken back by his father and made Daimyo of Curry. And at the same time, Oden also declares the 7 of his followers as his new retainers. But we know that there are still 3 missing, especially with Izo leaving later on. And sure enough, we find a young Kawamatsu finding Inuarashi and Nekomamushi stranded on the shores of Curry. Now, this shows us 2 very interesting things about Kawamatsu. First, that he looks incredibly cute in his youth, and secondly, that he's most likely not a mink after all, since Oda seems to make it a point here of making him being confused about Nekomamushi's and Inuarashi's appearance. What is really interesting, however, is how the chapter closes. And that is with the announcement that the remainders of the Rocks Pirates have now started recruiting people for their own crews. Now, this is really getting me super excited. As was confirmed by one of Oda's editors in a recent interview, it seems like we will be getting a lot more insights into that generation in the Wano arc. So I'm fairly convinced that we will see at least some of them coming to Wano to recruit followers. We already know that Whitebeard and Roger are very likely to make their way to Wano, and yes, I mean Kaido is a given as well at some point. But I'm also really curious about the likes of Shiki, Big Mom, or even the Marines. After all, there have been quite a bunch of characters over the course of the story that might have potential ties to Wano. So I really think that very soon the intensity of the chapters will really pick up again. Not that I particularly mind these more upbeat, easygoing chapters at the moment in the slightest, just the opposite. But getting the influence of people from outside Wano in this period of time will be amazing to see. So all in all guys, this chapter was a great lesson in storytelling and character building. We got a very solid base now for most characters that are relevant to the current timeline of the story, and we also got more and more characterization for Oden himself. Make sure to share your thoughts on this chapter, and if you enjoyed this review, consider liking and sharing it with your friends, as well as subscribing and becoming part of the crew. But of course, you can also dislike, not share, and unsubscribe. It's a free world, people. I hope to see you around next time, and until then, have a wonderful week.